This story is titled My Sweet Lord of Light. Marijuana smoke hung in a haze under the brocade bed canopy. Her name was Edith, but she wanted to be called Rainbow. To get her into bed, George was happy to oblige, because just this afternoon, he'd had an idea. It's a new theory, Rainbow, about fucking. That's so groovy. Nude, she lay back with her head over the end of the vast mattress so that her long blonde hair trailed down onto the fitted carpet. Her bangs stuck out upside down, and her tits drooped intriguingly chinwards. He shucked off bell-bottoms and briefs in one movement and flung them at the plate glass window where they caught in the drapery cornice. The tour manager was going to have to massively overtip the maids again. You know about tantric Buddhism, right? Of course, love. She began to sing, painfully off-key. Hare Krishna, Hare Hare. George laid a hushing finger on her upside-down lips. Now, listen, babe. Tantric is sex. Oh, wow. You know that men are yin and women are yang, right? So, every time a chick comes in bed, she transfers some of her yang to the guy. She rolled over so that bangs and boobs fell back into place. Under the straight blonde fringe, her eyes went wide. Does it hurt? He laughed. You tell me. Women have an infinite amount of yang. That's how they can have babies. She cogitated on this. I'm on the pill. It's the yang that's important. The Kundalini spiritual energy. You give it to me at orgasm. But then when I come, I give it back to you. If a guy wants to progress in the tantric arts, he has to learn how not to come. That sounds like a total drag, love. She reached for the joint in the ashtray balanced on the counterpane. He climbed up onto the big bed and tucked a pillow under her ass. I figured out a way around it. Think of orgasm as apples. You come, you give me an apple. I come, I give it back to you. I end up with 0 apples. But suppose I make you come twice. Then you've given me 2 apples, right? Then I come, I give you 1 back. But that leaves me with 1 for myself. She took a deep drag and passed him the joint. Then I know something about tantric sex that you don't know. Yeah, what? She began to giggle. Bet you anything you like. It was invented by a chick. He filled his lungs with the smoke and exhaled slowly. Damn, you're smart, Rainbow. Let's exchange some apples. The tantric doctrine had it that the more partners a guy had, the more yang he could amass. Satisfied and replete partners, of course. A Beatle had his pick of groupies, and tantric technique meant that not one of them went away discontented. Practice makes perfect. He was indisputably the best lay in rock and roll. Didn't that count for something? But his wife, Patty, could never see it. In the end, she divorced him on the grounds of infidelity. When he married Olivia, she didn't understand either, but the baby kept her busy. By working the apple theory, he was possibly the first tantric adherent to amass some serious yang. When he suggested Apple as the name for the music company, he didn't share the leg pull with John and Paul. He could feel the Kundalini energy slowly rising in some inner tank that he had never known was empty. Enlightenment crept in on him like the tide on some wide beach. No one wave seemed higher than the other, but year by year the water rose. To the knee, the crotch, the belly, the chin. He was getting on now, his sexuality altering with his health. Being a tantric master didn't, apparently, help you with aging or cancer. He didn't need to come every time now, even every other time. The accumulation of yang increased, even though his encounters were fewer. He dialed back on the traveling Wilburys, left his estate, Friar Park's gardens, to the staff. Instead, he spent hours every day in the special room he had set up for meditation. He sat in the traditional cross-legged posture, gazing into the wide mandala pattern let into the tiled floor, breathing in and out in the prescribed manner. He was close, so close. But to what? He would know when he got there. How many, many girls there had been. He held them in contemplation. Hundreds, thousands, scattered across the globe like beautiful stars, his personal galaxy. He visualized the earth glittering with his partners. Poised in this transcendent state, he could remember every one of them in every detail. He called to mind Rainbow that first day. Where was she now? As he formed the thought, the knowledge came to him, the world turning in his third inner eye so that his attention focused upon Brisbane. No longer Rainbow, Mrs. Edith Sanderwell was now a grandmother and about to retire from a staff post with the Australian Municipal Legislature. Her face floated past his inner vision, aged now, but plump and placid. Happy. Love you, babe, he told her silently, and she smiled as she bent over a parliamentary agenda. He spent an uncounted blissful time contemplating these myriad old connections, inspecting and saluting the female foundation of his power. It was like standing on a starry beach, a surface of tiny glittering particles that together were solid enough to support his astral form. Only when the millennium was about to turn did he think to look up from that fascinating sparkly beach, up at what was before him. It was the edge, the border of his astral plane. He saw it as a wall, the mossy old stone wall in an English country garden, and on the other side of that wall, someone loomed, someone else. As if he were at Friar Park, George strolled up to that wall and leaned an elbow on it. Nice day, isn't it? Hey, God's below, you're new. I didn't think anyone ever would evolve up out of that ooze over there. Who are you? Banahasta, the archer. 3 faces looked out from around his bald head. He was stark naked, and the strangely vivid red of his skin brought to mind a Lego block. His arms had an extra forearm sprouting from the elbow joint, so that he had 4 hands. These, respectively, grasped a handful of arrows, a trident, a windstorm, and a palm-sized stag that appeared to be alive but entirely calm. What about you? In his enlightened state, George did not need these cues. Raw karmic power poured from that other, beating upon his brow like the tropical sun at noon. Here was one of the great ones, a god, but he could reply with confidence. George, the beetle. Banahasta leaned on his side of the wall. One of his 6 eyes winked. Nice little patch you got there. I like what you've done with it. It'll do. George gazed over. As one might expect with a god, Banahasta's realm was much larger. It was patchy, as if half a dozen smaller sections had been stitched together into a larger piece. Why was it not twinkling with light like his? And you've achieved Purusha consciousness. He had never heard this term before, but George knew immediately what Banahasta was asking. Yes, all that is known in the world is at my call. You are the Lord of Light. George blinked. He had never thought of that. How about a test? Banahasta grinned with all 3 of his faces. How very many teeth each of the mouths had. Tell me, was there a Roger Zelazny in your universe? Who's that when he's at home? Wrote books, that science fiction stuff. Half a mo. George shifted his perception a little, peering down at the glittering sands under his bare feet again. Who had that woman been? After that benefit concert in L.A., adorable creature, his hand still remembered that firm roundness of her bottom. In the 70s, she did something with someone who was working with someone else on one of those shows. Star Trek, that was it. Denise. Denise? And he saw her. A tremendously plump, cheery woman in shorts and short hair dyed powder blue. She sat in a lawn chair on a California patio with a tremendously plump baby on her meaty bare knee. Jilly, she said to the young woman flipping burgers on the grill. I dreamed about George last night. That again. Jilly pressed the spatula down on his burgers. Droplets of fat fell sizzling onto the coals. Sid doesn't want to hear about how you laid a beetle. Denise chuckled, unoffended. I was a spicy female in those days, wasn't I, Siddy? So, oh, you were, sugar, you really were. Sid lifted his beer can to her. Everybody wanted to get into your pants. Was the dream X-rated? Kind of pointless, actually, like a lot of dreams. Denise made an exaggerated grimace at the baby, who gurgled in reply. George asked me who Roger Zelazny was. Remember, Mom, Jilly warned, Abigail's too young to hear about your sexcapades. He wrote this great book, Lord of Light. Sid sipped beer. Did you tell George Harrison that? Yeah, I lay in bed with this dynamite rock star lover, and instead of getting it on, I told him all about how in this novel, the Hindu gods were actually human beings who used tech to reincarnate themselves and oppress the rest of the planet. Sounds difficult. Jilly picked up a packet of plastic-wrapped orange squares. Okay, almost done. Who wants cheese? George put one spirit hand on Denise's shoulder. Of course, she could not perceive him. But babies had the true sight before they grew older and lost it. Her head was still wobbly on the soft neck, but the infant gazed up at him and said his name, clear as a bell. Gug. He set his other hand on the downy little head. How did you give a blessing? In this state, did his wishes have power? Music, Abby, he said. 12-string guitar. She squealed with joy. Gug! Denise sighed in bliss. Give me 2, hon. I could eat a horse. Gently, he let Denise drift away. Only then did he notice that Banahasta was much nearer. While George was learning about Roger Zelazny, the god had climbed over the dividing wall. It made George uncomfortable, but he spoke easily. Yeah, the guy wrote novels here. Was he different over on your side? Banahasta jerked his tripartite head at the wall. In my universe. You ever hear about brains or quantum theory, high-level physics? There are an infinite number of universes, all packed together like leaves in a book, close as one strand of your hair to another, but unreachable unless you can make the spiritual journey over the wall. High-level physics, damn. Brainy chicks who became quantum physicists didn't tend to hop into the sack with a rock musician. Surely George could seduce one somewhere. Oh, so your universe is different. In mine, no one's read Lord of Light. The author died, never finished writing it. All at once, George understood what Banahasta was telling him. The book was true. He was no god. Banahasta was mortal, like himself, only he tapped into the tantric power long ago. Slowly, a burning question flared up in his mind. In your universe, how did Roger Zelazny die? George didn't see him move, but suddenly bright red hands gripped him by each arm and around the neck, and the fourth hand reached terrifyingly for his crotch. I killed him, George, Banahasta said cheerfully, the way I'm going to kill you. George thrashed in vain. His astral form quivered with horror, but on some level he was not surprised. There was no reason why a spiritual adept could not be a murderous seeping git. The Asian concept of yin and yang taught that every advance is complemented by a retreat. Every lord of light is opposed by a dark master. He remembered Banahasta's patchwork realm, so gloomy. George had amassed his unprecedented reservoir of Kundalini power over half a century of benevolent and disciplined lovemaking. All you need is love, he had sung, and for him it was true. But there were other ways of encompassing the universe. Banahasta had found the other way, malevolence and murder. Now he could simply suck all of George's power away through his dick, yin and yang together, and add George's universe to his own. This will be the best orgasm of your short little life, lover boy, Banahasta said, and your last. George's hands scraped across the sand. He touched the universe, his own world and everything in it. The grip around his throat was like an iron clamp. He could not speak except in his soul. Help, George whispered. I need somebody. And the help was there, a world full of it, all at once. On Spotify and Apple Music and satellite radio and the oldies stations, the songs began to play. Retrospectives on Rubber Soul, reminiscences about photographing the album cover for Sgt. Pepper, impromptu blogs by old fans. It all flooded onto the internet. Thumbs on screens of 2 billion smartphones scrolled through the oldies lists. The founder of KISS told Morning Edition how watching the Beatles on Ed Sullivan had been his epiphany. Music professors lectured on the chord progressions of My Guitar Gently Weeps, and in 10,000 beginner guitar classes, the pupils paged open to Love Me Do. And nearer the girls. Music, George breathed. Older women around the planet began to hum or dance or sing aloud off-key. Warbling or weak, it rose like incense flowing into George's veins. He must be transcending time now because he saw baby Abigail, teen-aged and in ripped black yoga pants, holding a Fender guitar on stage. She struck a blazing chord and growled, "This one's for George." Then the drums rattled out a rhythm like lawnmower engines, and she began to wail something into the mic. And closest of all the other two, Paul used teak paddles to fatigue a farro salad while Heather slid a tray of toasted croutons out of the oven. A retriever sat, tail thumping, beside the counter, hoping for an edamame bean. "Listen," McCartney said to the dog, "do you want to know a secret?" "Do you promise not to tell?" George chimed in voicelessly. "Ooh, wah, ooh, closer." Ringo was on stage in Fort Worth, Texas, with his all-star band. He stepped up to the mic as the applause faded. Thank you, thank you. Right then, you know this one, eh? Sing along with me." George couldn't hear the chords because the entire stadium audience began to bellow it out. Tantric sex got him enlightenment, but it was the music that had got George the sex. "I get by with a little help from my friends." And all that help gave him the strength. He squeezed out every scrap of it and pushed himself through the astral plane, not up, but down. With a crash, he landed in his own body in the meditation room at Friar Park. The weight of his assailant sent him sprawling onto his back, painfully cracking his head against the tile. He writhed away. "Olivia, call security!" Banahasta staggered upright, glaring around. He was no longer bright red, and he had only 2 arms. As on the astral plane, he was stark naked, but here it looked tremendously sketchy. But he still had his signature handful of arrows. He snapped the fingers of his other hand and swore in Sanskrit when no astral bow appeared. With a shout, he snatched up an arrow instead and stabbed with it like a dagger. Yow! The bronze arrowhead stuck right through George's shoulder. He threw a futile 58-year-old man's punch. Guitarists aren't supposed to fight. It messes up their hands. Expertly, Banahasta bore down. The arrow grated agonizingly in George's flesh and snapped like the mundane weapon it had now become. Banahasta snatched up another and stabbed again. That was a bad one. Through the chest. Blood filled George's mouth and nose, choking him. But Olivia was there, her long black hair flying as she ran in with a fireplace poker. With a full overhand blow, his redoubtable wife clouted Banahasta hard on his bald head. Dead center, a pleasing solid clunk, and the god fell flat right onto George. With his inner eye, George could see the hole Olivia had broken into Banahasta's skull. He recognized the thick, glowing power oozing inside. It was the Kundalini energy that you directed in tantric sex, up from the genitals along your spine and through the top of your head. It was too difficult to struggle for breath in his battered body. He stepped out of it. Now his spirit hands were able to grip the glowing ooze and pull a piece out. Banahasta had crossed over from his universe to this one, leaving most of his power behind, and George had dragged him further in and down onto the physical plane. It might well be possible now to trap him here in this feeble physical form, rescuing not only this universe, but the one on the other side of the wall from the rule of a malevolent monster. George smoothed the glowing ooze out flat and tore off a piece. According to the Upanishads, there were 9 openings in the human body. He pressed a piece over each of Banahasta's eyes. Thank goodness there was now only 1 pair of them. Then the ears, a solid plug thumbed into each ear canal, and similar wads up each nostril. A good solid slab plastered over the mouth. The penis got a handful, and so did the anus. By this time, Banahasta was recovering, fighting the ceiling, but it was too late. Panting, George dredged up the last remains of his strength and pushed the seals down tight. Would Olivia object very much if he kept the errant god here? Friar Park was a big place. There was plenty of room in the cellar. George! George! Don't fade! Stay with me! Olivia yelled into his body's ear. The EMTs were crowded around, shoving tubes down his throat, sticking needles and lines into his arms. It all looked painful. Did he have to? The gurney rattled in and they lifted the limp body onto it. But Olivia wanted him. He staggered up to his unmoving mortal form and fell into it as the gurney rolled away. The sudden agony of being there made him groan aloud. Oh, thank God, Olivia cried and burst into tears. The EMTs rolled the gurney at a run out the front door. The drive was clogged with 24 police vehicles blinking with red and blue lights. Policemen canvassed the grounds, shouting to each other as they searched the shrubbery. Close to the door was a big van with armored windows. Banahasta struggled and roared incoherently, jerking in his handcuffs, but 6 policemen in riot gear levered their batons and steadily pressured him in through the double doors at the back. Of course, George reflected fuzzily, stupid of me to worry, a naked and raving violent home invader would be jailed hard. Why were they trundling around towards the pool? Then he heard the thump and roar of the medevac helicopter. Damn, they had better not break the boxwoods. He was slipping into oblivion, not upwards into enlightenment, but downwards into the red haze of blood loss. All his karmic power was poured away beyond recall. He wasn't going to live long enough to accumulate more. Probably never be well enough to fuck again. For a moment, an un-Shiva-like despair ate into his heart. But the sparkling lights of the helicopter swooping down rebuked him with the memory of all who loved him. He was the Lord of Light, his power won by love, not malevolence, and he had spent it all well. He would go out on a hit, #1 with a bullet. Cano Reeves in the Matrix could do no better, saving the effing universe. Dying, he murmured to Olivia. She squeezed his hand. No, you're not, love. You're in pretty grotty shape, Mr. Harrison, sir. The EMT slammed the door, and immediately the helicopter tipped and lifted into the air. We'll have you on the operating table in 10 minutes. He contemplated this new development as he sank into comfortable unconsciousness. I don't know why I said goodbye. I say hello. And that's the end.
Good.